Hey guys, tonight we're diving deep into something stranger than your Uncle Larry's obsession with collecting spoons. The world of plague doctors. Yes, those funky folks in beaked masks and long cloaks looked nothing like the healthcare professionals you see today. We're not talking about your local physician. We're talking about the medieval health wizards who battled uncertainty, ignorance, and an overwhelming stench of death. So before you slide into something comfy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy my ramblings. And please, drop a comment letting me know what potion you're brewing for tonight's dreamland. Now, dim those lights, turn on a fan for that soothing background hum, and let's embark on this weird adventure together. Imagine, have you ever pondered why plague doctors dressed like oversized birds? Were they going for fashion or function? Did they think the beaks could hold magical properties? What was actually in those mysterious potions they handed out with all the confidence of a charlatan? How many patients did they treat, only to find out that garlic and prayer merit no medical degree? So without further ado, congratulations. You've just woken up in 1348, the peak of the plague, armed only with a beak mask and a vague sense of dread. Good luck. Welcome to the peculiar world of medieval medicine, where fashion statements weren't just accessories, but crucial armour against the dreaded plague. You might be wondering, why the beaked mask? Was it a fashion choice from the illustrious birdcage collection? Or were they just trying to avoid the odorous cloud of malaise that constantly hovered over their patients? Picture this: a doctor clad in leather, looking like a fearsome avian creature descending upon the sick, a sight that could both inspire terrified awe and mild confusion among the populations. It's as if someone had combined a birdwatcher's dream with a Halloween costume idea gone awry. Now, let's unravel this mystery. The beak served a very specific purpose, much like those overly dramatic James Bond gadgets that look cool, but are made for more than just show. Plague doctors believed that the beak could be filled with aromatic herbs like lavender, mint, and rosemary. This was supposed to ward off the miasma, the bad air they thought caused disease. So, imagine yourself sneezing the worst cold ever, while your doctor is wafting a bouquet of scented weeds in your direction, like he's trying to impress a date. All we can say is, talking about bad air in this context takes on a slightly more ridiculous tone. But hold on. While those doctors were essentially styled as medieval bird watchers, you have to admit they also looked downright intimidating. Cloaked in long black robes that billowed dramatically while they strutted down the street, they brought a flair of the macabre that could make anyone gasp, "Fashion," while simultaneously clutching their chest in fright. It was the ultimate blend of style and survival. A runway show performed on the streets of plague-riddled cities, a mystical, gothic blend of haute couture and a slapstick horror movie plot. Of course, let's not forget the real question. Did they actually believe this would work? Imagine asking your doctor today why they don't wear bird masks, and they reply, "It's part of my charm." Considering the limited medical knowledge of the time, the logic behind that choice was as sound as feeding a goldfish a deep-fried donut. It seems impressive but doesn't end well. They thought that odours truly carried disease, much like today's trends can carry certain scents. So if health was a game of catch that smell, they were all on board the hype train. Now stand back for a moment and say a prayer for the fabric designers responsible for the actual masks. Did they just hang out at the local tavern, throwing back tankards of ale, eyelids barely open, while stitching together what would end up as the most bizarre accessory roulette of mainstream history? You can practically hear the brainstorming session. So what if we dress them like cranes, with a twist of insanity? The result was a rising success, a symbol of cunning and survival that would send chills down spines and laughs, echoing through taverns. And for as odd as it sounds, the look evolved over time. What began as a necessity turned into a rather practical uniform. High fashion was now paralleled with contagion. You could say the plague doctor became the ultimate trendsetter for medical professionals, at least in the realm of aesthetics. Modern doctors tend to stick to scrubs, and thank goodness for that. Unless you pay extra for an avian-themed therapy session, it's unlikely that you'll see beaked masks in your local health facility anytime soon. So, perhaps those fabulous feathered fancies were less about surviving the plague and more about the appearance of saving the day. After all, nothing says professionalism like looking like an extra from an obscure opera. It's like being over-prepared for a waltz while battling the inadvertent side effects of breathing in a mix of rotten cabbage and despair. That's medieval shenanigans for you. In conclusion, the beaked mask is a humorous blend of form and folly. Sipping through the thin chalice of dramatic design, these plague doctors became the Gothic guardians of an era scrambling to find answers in a sea of confusion and suffering. Yes, they were iconic, outrageous, and certainly noteworthy for capturing the spectacle of medicine, like a Renaissance festival exploded into treatises of patient care. So the next time you're feeling under the weather, just remember, you could be stuck in a world where your physician sports a beak and an overwhelming odour of dried herbs, and for that, we can be ever so grateful for modern medicine. Let's peek inside the plague doctor's bag, shall we? Prepare for a treasure trove of bizarre and questionable tools, from potions brewed with enough stray eyeballs to make a witch cackle, to odd instruments that look suspiciously like they were pilfered from a mad scientist's lab. How did they know what worked? Spoiler alert, they didn't. In the world of medieval medicine, trial and error was the name of the game, and the line between healer and butcher was as thin as a piece of parchment paper, possibly used to hold some unmentionable concoction. Picture this. You find yourself standing in a dimly lit room filled with jars containing every substance imaginable. There's a tincture made of crushed roots that smells like a hard-working goat, a vial of mysterious liquid resembling swamp water, and herbs that look suspiciously like they've been snatched from the nearest compost heap. It's the kind of space where death could come from either the disease or the dubious remedies offered. You can practically feel the confusion of patients who walked in hoping for a miracle, only to be met with jars labelled bubonic bluster and guaranteed to cure whatever ails ya. Maybe. Now let's talk about those potions. Plague doctors were all about creating all sorts of magic brews. They concocted remedies with the finesse of a toddler playing kitchen. You'd find everything from ground-up bat feces to essence of crushed dream mixed in there. Sure, some of the ingredients must have been based on folklore, but one can only imagine the writing on the label making lofty promises that had absolutely no scientific backing. One sip will cure your pox, and the resulting hallucination might just take you to the underworld, where you can meet your ancestors. A solid pitch, if you ask me. And of course, no self-respecting plague doctor would roll about town without their essential tools. First up, the trusty cane or stick, not just for poking the occasional body on the street to see if it's alive, but also for its versatility in examining lesions. Forget high-tech medical instruments. This stick was the medieval Swiss Army knife. If it didn't meet your medical needs, you could always use it to prod other people's livestock, and possibly your friends if you were feeling mischievous. But let's get to the real pièce de résistance, the technically referred to as surgical tools. These babies look like they belonged in a horror movie's prop department rather than a medical kit. Who wouldn't want to choose from a selection of scalpels that look suspiciously like oversized pizza cutters and forceps reminiscent of the claws on a prehistoric dinosaur? Honestly, you might expect these tools to be used for cutting pizzas at your neighbourhood feast instead of for draining pus at the physician's clinic. Of course, there was also a delightful assortment of leeches, carefully preserved in a jar filled, with what can only be described as the remnants of everything else. So, If you were feeling bold, you could dabble in medieval bloodletting, a rather questionable practice championed by many a plague doctor. Sure, it didn't really cure the disease, but who wouldn't appreciate a dramatic flair? Let's just drain this thigh and see what happens. If it doesn't work, you'll at least enjoy a nice red hue on your leg. And what about those infamous masks? A moment of silence for the beaked masks that served both a fashion statement and scented filter. Two birds with one stone. The beak was often stuffed with aromatic herbs to keep the stink of rot at bay, because when you're visiting distressed individuals, who wants to smell death over cloves? In the end, the Plague Doctor's kit was a grand representation of an era muddled by mysticism and a strong smell of death. Each jar held stories of desperate hopes and the scourge of diseases. Yes, their methods may have been misguided, but at least these intrepid souls dressed for the occasion. So, next time you feel a sneeze coming on, just remember how truly lucky you are in this modern world of medicine and technology. Raise a glass to the visionaries who carried their dubious toolkit into the depths of despair and survived, if only to be recorded in history as the world's most peculiar professions. Ah, remedies. The wild elixirs of the 14th century, where the recipe might just as well come from a rat's diary. Ever wonder what the go-to treatment for the Black Death was? Spoiler. It involved a lot of leeches and magic herbs that only smelled good because nobody knew what a real garden looked like. These cures were the stuff of nightmares, where common sense was thrown out the window faster than you could say bloodletting. With every cough and sneeze, panicked townsfolk scrambled for the nearest healer, who often appeared more like a theatrical actor than a licensed physician. First up was the trusty leech, because when your body is turning against you, what better choice than tiny blood-sucking creatures that suck out the bad blood, or, as they like to call it, excess humours. You might imagine ancient doctors huddling around patient beds like nature's own twisted version of a war council, sending in leeches as though they were the cavalry. Sure, vampires have a bad reputation today, but seek that 14th century cure, and you were practically inviting tiny beasts to a buffet. You could almost hear the negotiations. Surely one leech will make this better, right? The response, of course, is a resounding no, as more often than not the patients ended up feeling weaker, as they lost more blood than they bargained for. Then there was the mystical world of herbal remedies. Picture this: a pot of thick green sludge bubbling over a fire, with the townsfolk swearing it would cure the plague. Ingredients often included anything the doctor could find on the ground, or perhaps in the neighbour's bog. What do you mean you can't tell the difference between this turnip leaf and a poison mushroom? Hearing that magic word, herb, people would nod vigorously, convinced they were being ushered into a mystical realm of healing. In reality, that concoction's most magical quality was its ability to induce spontaneous vomiting. Who needed a doctor when you could lose all your meals and the contents of your stomach at the same time? Efficiency, folks. Now, let's not forget the power of spiritual remedies, heavily intertwined with the remedies we discussed, as people turned to their faith. The word plague became synonymous with divine wrath, and no one wanted to be caught on the wrong side of the Almighty. Enter the priests, cloaked in robes and sincerity, offering prayers like their income depended on it, which it almost did. Speaking of which, could you imagine requesting blessings for good health in a voice cloaked in dramatic flair while a wooden cross dangled from your neck? Surely a much better option than merely drinking a potion that could knock out a small horse. And let's discuss the unique practice of miasma therapy, where healers believed bad smells were responsible for the plague. Yes, you heard me right. Instead of fresh air to breathe, doctors suggested that people gather flowers, herbs, and spices, anything pungent enough to ward off the stench that haunted their surroundings. So if one neighbour's goat was stinking up the block, it was perfectly normal to surround yourself with an entire garden of lavender in hopes of avoiding that shawl of old goat odour. It was as if they thought they were keeping the plague at bay with the power of floral perfume. Perhaps the most unfortunate and least effective remedies were those involving fire and sweat. Unable to comprehend that pathogens, a concept completely foreign, were the cause of illness, some doctors prescribed extreme heat as a cure. They'd wrap the afflicted in layers upon layers of blankets, effectively creating their own medieval sauna, while monitoring their symptoms like anxious hawks, insisting a good sweat will chisel away the plague. Nothing says health quite like your own personal heat stroke. If only they had understood that they were crafting a furnace instead of a refuge, they'd have gone for a nice cool breeze instead. As comically tragic as all these remedies were, they stemmed from a desperate hope to ward off an unrelenting foe. Despite the bizarre concoctions and fever dreams of desperate healers, at the end of the day there was one constant. People were trying to survive. So next time you think you have a bad cold, or even if you've just googled weird home remedies, take a moment to appreciate how far we've come from the dark days of leeches and potions that could just as easily have come from the witch's neighbourhood cookbook. Remember, laughter may not be the best medicine, but it sure beats being covered in leeches and surrounded by suspicious goat smells. Here, superstition reigns supreme. Prepare for a ride through the charmingly bizarre beliefs that guided people's lives, such as the idea that bathing would invite the plague. Seriously, could you imagine forgetting to wash yourself and still expecting good health? Somehow, bathing became a luxury rather than a necessity. Picture it. The stench of filth rolled through the air like a sinister fog, and the idea of cleanliness translated into torment. You might be thinking, why wouldn't they just take a bath? Well, my friend, it appears they were too busy banking on the prayers of the pious, squeezing their eyes shut and hoping for the best. Now, let's take a stroll down the cobbled streets of medieval towns, where the illusory spells of superstitions conjured their own brand of daily drama. If you were to ask the baker how many loaves he baked that day, he might shoot you a glance like a starving raven about to snatch your lunch. In his mind, each loaf must be protected, blessed by either a priest or a particularly enchanting four-leaf clover, all to prevent any drop of bad luck. After all, he should beware of that one neighbour who believed that lemon peels hung over doorways warded off that nasty, infamous plague. So perhaps your best course of action is to avoid baked goods, unless you want to cast all manner of incantations simply to enjoy bread. And don't even get me started on the round-the-clock dust-covered cringe-inducing medical advice. Advice that made rituals around health seem like another local sport. "What's that, good sir?" You might overhear some frazzled townsfolk chirp. "Oh, it's a boil! Make sure you don't touch it with those filthy hands!" To which the boil sufferer would naturally nod earnestly, but only after ensuring their friend had indeed rubbed a magical memento against it. Poor fellows banished their rashes and infections with a mix of prayer and pitchforks, all to ward off unsavoury spirits rather than opt for, oh, I don't know, washing their hands. Meanwhile, the church's fountains of wisdom flowed freely, but only when filled with the holy water faintly tinged with the scent of desperation. People lined up for a sprinkle as if waiting for the next amusement ride, fueled by the underlying certainty that each drop would save them from any inflammatory misfortune. A common saying back then was, "Where there's a priest, there's your cure." Ever felt like your sore throat was truly caused by having offended the cosmic order on Tuesday? Exactly. So their health depended on appeasing deities rather than attending to basic hygiene. Gargling vinegar to cleanse the soul became a town favourite, and yes, this genuine health regimen led to much throat pinching, but anything was better than feeling doom approach like a heavy fog. plague panic was omnipresent. Onlookers witnessed neighbours coating themselves in fragrant oils, claiming it was a viscous barrier against illness. But what about washing with soap, you'd think to yourself? Alas, that was too radical. After all, can you imagine the societal shock of someone lifting red-painted hands toward the local lord while demanding soap? Blasphemy! Let's talk about folk medicine, where every ailment came with a surefire remedy sprouted from the fertile soil of shared imagination. Ah, a stomachache, a villager might say. That's nothing, a dash of foxglove and a dance under the full moon won't cure. This was the sort of logic that turned medicinal gardens into thriving hoods of bizarre concoctions, concocted with more charm than an actual doctorate in medicine. Meanwhile, herbalists were perceived as the magicians of health, waving their hands over a boiling cauldron, whispering sweet nothings to fend off any malignant spirits in their pots of botanical oblivion. And while everyone tried to diligently avert death, rumours of witches flitted through the streets like errant bats. Accusations flew, leaving innocent women to ward off inquisition with nothing but a cauldron full of herbs. They'd say, "What? You don't want me to cure you? You think a little moonlight will save you?" But alas, they were often only punished for being more inventive than the average townsfolk. So as you wander through this realm of rustic beliefs, take a moment to reflect on how the fears of the plague changed the very fabric of existence. It solidified an era where bathing was taboo, where charm and incantation were essential to ward off invisible enemies. And yet, through it all, they leaned on laughter and charm to ease the pains of life. Because if you're going to dodge death with a bewitching dance, you might as well enjoy the music. The irony is that in the chaos of superstition, they always found a way to make coping a quirky form of art, one that lingers long after the final plaid-cloaked doctor has wandered into the sunset, beaked mask trailing behind them like a superhero cape. Let's talk about that iconic outfit. Did you know that the long coat and gloves were often made of waxed fabric to block the evil vapours? Picture long-beaked hats clashing horribly with oversized shoes while they trudge through muck. It was a fashion statement created from sheer panic. These outfits weren't just clothes. They were the medieval equivalent of the biohazard suit, a protective barrier against the miasma of death floating through the air like unwanted party guests. But did anyone stop to consider that maybe the beak style was just the doctors trying to channel their inner birds? And while they certainly looked bizarre, you have to admit it kind of adds a flair to the whole "I'm here to save you from dying" approach. The beaked mask itself was the pièce de résistance, crafted in such a way that it resembled a crow trying to convince everyone it was a peacock. I mean, was there any thought to the fact that looking like a predator might freak patients out just a smidge? Imagine waking up from a fever dream to see someone standing over you that resembles the Grim Reaper's cosplay buddy. "Good morning, I'm here to help you through this," they'd say, fully decked out like they just emerged from a gothic horror film. I suppose it was this charm, not the bearskin rug style, but the hope that they could cure your ails while looking like they were auditioning for the role of the world's most confused bird. But let's get real. These outfits were designed with function in mind. Doctors needed protection from the swamp of plague-infested corpses, greasy peasants, and all sorts of unsavoury odours wafting about. And let's not forget, the people really believed there was bad air out there. Breathing. That was just a lead-up to their inevitable demise, and the last thing you wanted was to inhale the stench of illness, mixed with what I can only imagine was a potent blend of garlic, vinegar, and somebody's bad cooking. The coat was typically long and made of thick material, allowing doctors to look as imposing as possible, while also warding off germs. Swimming about the streets, these cloaked figures would pass by, stirring eyebrows and heartbeats alike. Who needs superheroes when you've got a guy who can mix herbal potions while stepping over a pile of animal droppings? And speaking of animal droppings, Have animals started turning into mythical creatures? Because you'd need a full spa retreat after stepping through the muck left by livestock on market day. Let's dig a little deeper into the wardrobe malfunction that just kept on giving. Picture it. Huge hats made of leather coned up to form a beak at the top, fingerless gloves that looked like they were a DIY project gone terribly wrong, and shoes that squeaked more than a crowd of rats trying to scurry away unscathed. The overall vibe, mortality chic, straight from the runways, or maybe more of the what were they thinking collection. Striding. Through town, these doctors didn't just have a questionable sense of style. They may as well have had a marching band follow them around, complete with ominous trumpets blaring. And what about hygiene? Spoiler alert, not a lot of washing happening for these doctors. With their protective garb often caked in a medley of blood, sweat and tears, one could surmise that the stench was merely an unintentional bonus they carried with pride. I suppose public perception might have led people to believe that simply wearing the outfit granted one immunity from germs, regardless of the gastronomical experiences underlying the fabric. Don't even get me started on the beak. It was not merely for aesthetics. No, that beak was stuffed with fragrant herbs and spices like rosemary, which the doctors believed protected them from vile odours that might enter their system. It's like stuffing your sock drawer with some old spice to mask month-old feet smells. Can you imagine going to the doctor and catching a whiff of what felt like a sweet romantic evening gone tragically wrong while they attempted to check your temperature? So there you have it, folks. The plague doctor's wardrobe was a chaotic cocktail of style, function, and perhaps a sprinkle of desperation. While we may poke fun at how absurd they looked, it's hard to deny the sheer audacity of their attire in the face of a pandemic, an outfit that not only became an iconic symbol of medicine, but reminded people of the lengths to which humanity would go to battle the unknown. A fusion of style and survival that reminds us that even as the blood spilled and the cries echoed through the streets, up stood a peculiar sight in that chaotic masquerade of life and death. Perhaps the real question is, who's ready for a renaissance in plague doctor fashion? It's about time for a comeback, don't you think? Join us as we journey into the diagnostic techniques of yore. Spoiler alert, if it didn't involve a crystal ball or a good luck charm, they were stumped. Could you imagine being asked to identify which ailment was plaguing your friend by simply looking hard? Tension rises as they debate whether it's plague or simply bad soup. You might find yourself sitting at the local tavern, where patrons whisper about a grumbling epidemic that swept through the village last week. One rogue cough, and suddenly you're at the centre of a potential plague panic. First, gather round as our trusty plague doctor squints at you with the seriousness of a bad Netflix actor. He checks your pulse as if gauging the temperament of a stubborn sheep and peers closely at your skin as if it holds the secrets to the universe. Could be the pox, could be just a rash from the hay. Did you eat that questionable cheese your neighbour was hawking? Questions fly around like rogue chickens, each more absurd than the last. In this world, everything could potentially be the last breath you take. How thrilling. But here's the kicker. Our friend the plague doctor wasn't armed with the wonders of modern science. Oh no. He had an arsenal of dubious methods that range from the downright hilarious to the chillingly bizarre. For example, if you were suffering from a patchy rash, they might squint and ponder aloud. Did you skip a day of prayers? There's your answer. It's as if God kept an Excel spreadsheet of those who forgot about church and sent them a blistering dose of karma in the form of soap allergies. To make things even more intriguing, some doctors believed in humours. No, not comedic acts for medieval entertainment, but 4 bodily fluid balances that dictated your health: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Imagine walking in only to hear your doctor declare, "Ah yes, it's your black bile acting up again. You should probably consider a good leech treatment. I hear they're having a sale." You're left wondering if you'd prefer a bloodletting over being doused in the elderberry syrup, which always seems to be the go-to remedy for every chronic condition, including bad breath. And speaking of remedies, let's not forget the potions concocted in dimly lit corners of the market. Oh, you're feeling unwell. Someone offers a herbal stew that smells suspiciously like the aftermath of last week's fish fry. Just add some crushed nettle and wait 3 days. If you feel worse by then, congratulations, you're officially doomed. In medieval times, herbalists and healers might be just as perplexed as you, boiling roots and herbs that would either send you to the grave or save your life. Take a moment to marvel at how diagnoses turned into a social affair. Picture ancient villagers gathered around their local physician like a budding sitcom, full of woe, fear, and the promise of grim laughter. What's that, you say? Oh, you've sprouted an extra toe? It must be the dark magic of the rival barber. Instead of conjuring sympathy, they would activate the snicker engine, because any illness could spin a humorous yarn wrapped in just the right tension to keep a village entertained long into plague night. Once our brave doctor settles on the diagnosis, brace yourself for the treatment. Should you have bad soup, you might be confined to your hovel and served a diet of boiled turnips and barley water for weeks as part of the recovery plan. It'll cleanse your spirit, they assure you. Meanwhile, the smell wafting from your cottage could clear a forest. Yet the doctor would always pat himself on the back, claiming your fortunes rested on a soup diet, so you won't catch the real plague, whatever that means. So, as you drift into sleep, imagine this quirky community full of colourful characters wrestling with their health and seeking cures from a doctor who's more poem than prescription. What a time to live! Next time you think you're unwell, just remember that it could always be worse. You could be rashing it up in the 14th century, turning to your neighbours not for comfort but comebacks, all while clutching a beaked mask and hoping they were right about the good luck charms. Ever considered the relation between the avian design and plagues? It's time to explore why these doctors opted to channel their inner birds, any chance they were simply flying away from their responsibilities. Given the right conditions, you'd think they'd at least have learned to soar through the skies. But alas, instead of graceful gliding, we got beaked masks that look like leftover props from a Shakespearean production gone horribly wrong. Picture it. You're in the 14th century, navigating through a city buzzing with fear, death, and the occasional overripe cabbage rolling down the street. You see plague doctors strutting around in their long flowing cloaks, complete with bird-beaked masks that are 1 part fashion statement, 2 parts public health nightmare. The popular belief of the day was that the miasma, or bad air, was the primary culprit behind the plague. Hence, the doctors believed their beaked masks covered with sweet-smelling herbs would somehow filter this noxious air. It sounds fancy, but let's be real. Who wouldn't look slightly ridiculous wandering around the streets with a literal bird beak? The beak wasn't just there to give them a distinctive look, it was also a practical tool. Or at least that's what they told themselves as they shuffled through the filth of medieval streets. Doctors stuffed those beaks with aromatic herbs and spices, hoping the pleasant scents would block out the horrors wafting through the air like a terrible invisible fog. It's like trying to hide a rotten egg smell by dousing yourself in lavender. One doesn't quite cover up the other. But hey, it made them feel like they had a fighting chance against the germs. So why birds? Well, a little bird told me, history suggests, many of the doctors believed that avian creatures, particularly those associated with mortality like crows and ravens, possessed a divine wisdom about death. This classic connection between birds and death didn't just make for fabulous Gothic poetry, it might have also added a layer of fanciful mystique to their work. Who wouldn't want a feathered costume when you're venturing into the graveyards of plague-ravaged towns? Just imagine wearing that outfit to the grocery store today. You'd definitely get a few stares and perhaps some unsolicited advice about your fashion choices. Then there's the symbolism. Birds often represent the soul's journey to the afterlife, fluttering between this world and the next. What better way to present oneself as a harbinger of healing, dressed as the very creatures that flit between realms? Medieval minds like to dabble in the mystic, after all, believing deeply in almost everything but hygiene. By adopting a bird-like appearance, plague doctors were perhaps sending a message. They were creatures of transition, attempting to ferry souls from illness back into health, or at least trying to avoid being mistaken for a commoner while doing so. Can we take a moment to appreciate how ludicrous yet comical this medical theatre truly was? Actual doctors gallivanting in feathered cloaks, parading around with grand gestures that announced their significant intent: healing. Under those beaks, anonymous as they were, there was a wave of panic and uncertainty. For many townsfolk, seeing a plague doctor was like spotting a rare bird. You might get excited for a brief second, then realise they only meant doom or delusion. And speaking of delusions, let's talk about the reality of their treatment methods. The bird-beaked warriors wielded potions that were more akin to perfumed poison than actual medicine. If you were ever treated for plague, you might have been prescribed concoctions involving dubious ingredients such as ground unicorn horn, totally a thing, and other oddities plucked straight from our apothecary folklore. Personally, an antidote of vague, magical properties seems to offer only about as much hope as having a pack of pigeons bless your health. It sounds nice, but ultimately leaves you with the same problems. Just a lot of feathers to clean up afterward. So it becomes clear why they dressed in the bizarre attire of birds. It was a reflection of their times, their limited understanding of disease, and their unyielding hope to be more than just men in the muck of mortality. Instead of relying on sincerity or real skills, what they had was an elaborate costume and a marked identity. Though the beaked masks might have offered a morsel of comfort in a horrific age, what lay underneath often remained unsuspecting faces equally burdened by fear and confusion. In the end, the next time you encounter ideas around plague doctors, remember that behind those avian masks and cloaks lay humans trying to navigate a world swirling with misfortune, all while attempting to stay one step ahead of the very diseases that trumped their knowledge. Birds indeed. They weren't just trying to navigate the skies, they were awkwardly trying to navigate life's terrifying uncertainties, one beak at a time. Plague doctors, the unsung heroes, or the neighbourhood quacks? You'll find no clean-cut answers here. Your fellow citizens may have seen them as either divine saviours or mere men in funny hats serving no purpose. Can you blame them? On one hand, these beaked wonders were the only professionals donning the tall hats and cloaks while confronting the plague with a puzzled look and a suitcase full of dubious remedies. On the other hand, with their long jackets made from animal skin coated in wax and hats that probably needed a housing permit, they resembled the aftermath of a failed Halloween contest more than trusted physicians. Picture this. You're a well-meaning but hopelessly unqualified person thrust into the role of a healer during one of the worst pandemics in history. Massachusetts Bay had nothing on 14th century Europe's ghastly rat drama, and the plague was a veritable crisis that turned everyone's day into a game of will I catch this thing? Plague doctors had quite an interesting gig, swooping in to help while equipped with nothing more than a piece of paper that loosely translated to, "I'm a doctor, I swear." How convincing is that? It's like showing up to a job interview in pyjamas and saying, "Trust me, I'm totally qualified." When the Black Death started claiming lives like a popular discount sale at the village butcher, local communities were understandably desperate. Dunking their heads in olive oil and baking bread to smother signs of illness seemed like great ideas, but when that proved ineffective, folks had no other option than to seek out the ominous figures in beak masks. Plague doctors became an essential part of the landscape, even if they weren't passing on solutions wrapped in assurance. The people clung to their mysterious combatants against this invisible villain, but they also held back giggles at the sight of those outrageous beaks. Was it really protecting them, or simply giving the illusion of competence while society crumbled? And let's not forget the fact that the doctors were often amateurs, more convinced of their own role in history than possessed of real medical skill. You might see them prescribing herbal teas made from questionable concoctions, or insisting a good prayer was just as potent as any potion. You've got to love the irony. They could be sitting around the fire while painting tales of heroic escapades, or portraying themselves as erudite gentlemen skilled in the science of ailments. In reality, their annals featured nothing but desperate attempts to avoid learning what the heck was actually going on. With half the population dropping like flies, it's no wonder some considered plague doctors to be glorified snake oil salesmen rather than effective healers. Folks would look on in confusion as these avian messengers of doom fluttered into town, cloaked in layers of thick cloth and wielding dubious instruments straight from the dungeon of some wayward wizard. Who trusts a person with a stick that resembles an artistic version of a medieval pestle? And while many hailed them as crucial players in keeping society from spiralling into chaos, others merely rolled their eyes at their lackluster performance. It was almost a wonder that the plague doctors collected fees for their services. Some villagers opted to bar the doors to their homes, refusing admittance and sobbing no thanks at the ominous doctors outside. Because in their minds, sending away the beaked oddity and relying on their grandmother's cabbage soup seemed infinitely better than the risk of bringing more illness into the fold. Who knew whether dark forces were behind the beak? Maybe they'd learned their craft from a malicious bird. Yet, just when you thought the good doctor would have to close up shop and find a more stable profession, like maybe bird watching, the community spiraled into a sharper belief in their prowess as the years went on. Out of necessity, towns started to lean into a collective understanding of the importance of these practitioners, even if you were still bound to hear the murmurings of others, unceremoniously considering them clumsy quacks in costumes at the next gathering. So, as the Black Death muddled along and society teetered on collapse, the iconic image of the plague doctor began to solidify. No longer just a misguided janitor trying to mop up communal illness, these figures took centre stage, often deemed a necessary part of the violent spectacle of the times. In the end, they were a complicated mix of courage and farce, each serving both the role of healer and the punchline in a dark medieval joke that no one truly understood. And in a strange way, perhaps that's how they became heroes, or quacks, of their time. Let's face it, plagues create business opportunities. Join me in a journey into the merchant world of remedies. Ever heard of plague taxes? The good doctors might have cashed in on their remedies amid chaos in ways that could give modern-day entrepreneurs a run for their money. Picture this. It's the 14th century. The Black Death is wreaking havoc, and instead of a full-blown panic, some clever chaps are busy concocting potions, selling snake oil, and mixing about as much science and terribleness as your local essential oils distributor today. With death and disease knocking at every door, you can bet your last loaf of mouldy bread that the market was sizzling hotter than a freshly baked pie. Herbalists and quacks alike popped up faster than garden weeds, selling everything from ground-up bat wings to exotic herbs that sounded more like spells from a Harry Potter novel than actual medicine. Now tell me, wouldn't you like to have one of those entrepreneurial spirits? This particular sense of opportunity was driven by pure survival instincts, woven into medieval commerce. Something akin to capitalism, but instead of wallets, people were filled with dread and rogue intuition. Let's dive into what this booming business looked like. Various charlatans, often with more confidence than qualifications, roamed the streets peddling their miraculous cures. They would stand in a public square, dramatically waving vials as if they were selling the elixir of life itself. Spoiler alert, they usually weren't. You might have heard their cry, "Swoop, swoop, free your ailments, this potion will cure all." In the mad swirl of desperation, who could resist the promise of health? As the plague escalated, so did the prices of these questionable elixirs. Drenched in naivety, townsfolk forked over their hard-earned coins for cures that could only be described as artistic interpretations of medicinal. Want a quick fix? Fork over a few shillings for a potion with more magic than efficacy. At one point, the vibrant market for these cures reached its pinnacle. It's like Amazon all over again. But instead of 2-day shipping, you might be getting 2 days less of life if the potion didn't quite work out. And speaking of profits, let's not forget the enterprising folk responsible for plague taxes. Yes, plague-induced levies on everything from cleaning supplies, read water and a splattered rag, to mood-lifting herbal teas. Count on authorities to find a way to monetize even the stench of death wafting through town. Imagine a town crier shouting, "Hear ye, hear ye! For the cost of a mere 6 pennies, cleanse your soul of the plague." They practically mixed taxation with hocus pocus. Did any of these potions ever work? Maybe, just maybe, they had a placebo effect stronger than your great-aunt's holiday fruitcake. It's hard to say if the beetroot jam with crushed ants genuinely cured anyone, or if it simply filled stomachs, while minds were distracted enough to forget about death knocking at the door. Perhaps some found solace in believing they were doing something proactive amidst the overwhelming chaos. And then there were those who enlisted the services of the doctors themselves. As if this wasn't a wild enough scenario, some physicians donned their desperate saviour capes, polishing their beaked masks to market themselves amidst the dying. They had families to support too. Need a diagnosis? That'll cost you a coin or two, and since the doctor survived the last bout of the plague, surely they're worth the investment. But herein lies the cruel irony. Many folk believed medicine was falling short due to ignorance of disease, when in reality, the grim reality was built on sheer survival. People were willing to risk the chance of seeing their name on a gravestone, not just out of fear for their lives, but fear of missing a flourishing opportunity. So, what's the lesson here? History can be difficult, chaotic, and at times painfully absurd. Merchants capitalized on human suffering much like the modern world sometimes does. While you may roll your eyes at such a sordid economy, you can't help but appreciate the sheer resilience of the human spirit to survive, adapt, and occasionally revel in hilariously misguided attempts to make something, death, economically advantageous. So next time you sip a overpriced turmeric latte in your trendy cafe or scroll through ads for the newest wellness craze, just remember, history has a funny way of repeating itself, and who knows, perhaps somewhere, a plague doctor is wagging a bony finger at you, a metaphorical reminder that opportunity often dances its jig on the graves of those past. Imagine living in a world where every cough reminds you of your own mortality. It's not just a seasonal allergy, it's potential doom. Let's explore how folks tiptoed through life, terrified of even the smallest sneeze, as if that little sound could carry a plague across the whole village. You remember that feeling, right? That moment at work when someone coughs in the break room and suddenly you're weighing your chances of survival against an airborne cold? Now crank that anxiety up to medieval levels, where a sneeze wasn't merely an inconvenience, it was a death sentence waiting to happen. Picture this. You're walking through a crowded market in 1348, the smell of stale bread and unwashed bodies wafting through the air. As you navigate through the throngs of people, you try your best to keep your head down, because eye contact might just lead to a conversation about someone's neighbour whose cat sneezed last week, an update that could be quite fatal given the circumstances. A passerby lets out an ominous wheeze. Do you duck and cover, or just shake your head in despair? You choose to duck, not wanting to catch whatever that unfortunate soul is dishing out like bad coins. Everywhere you look, people are suspicious of each other, and not in the fun conspiracy theory way. No, this is a world where a mere brush of skin against another's could spell disaster. Time for a quick history lesson. The Black Death was more than just an unusually bad cold. This plague was a party crasher of monumental proportions, sweeping through cities and towns like an unwelcome guest, who not only drinks all your wine, but also leaves you dead. With mortality rates climbing faster than any medieval roller coaster, you can bet your boots that staying healthy was a priority, if you could figure out how. And amid this chaos, we have our dear doctors strolling about in long cloaks, beaked masks and bubble-like goggles. Trust me, it was quite the look. Imagine strutting through town dressed like a crow at a funeral. But it wasn't just for fashion. Oh no, that beak was meticulously designed to house fragrant herbs and flowers, intended as makeshift air fresheners. If you're struggling with allergies, good luck identifying that tree from 50 paces away. A scent of roses turned into an elaborate ploy to fend off diseases floating around like unwelcome guests at a medieval soiree. Who needed effective medical training when you had a nose full of sage and lavender? As these plague doctors walked the streets, did they know how ridiculous they looked? Surely they must have felt a bit silly, like a lost cast member from a poorly rehearsed play about avian-inspired healthcare. If only the general public had known that they were more concerned about not catching the plague than looking dapper. But small mysteries of human vanity aside, living in constant fear of infection became normalised to the point where public antics to avoid germs became a national sport. Did you hear that? Hermione coughed while sharing her mutton stew. Oh dear! Cross yourselves, gather the garlic and prepare the leeches. It's the end times. Suddenly everyone's casting side-eye glances like you just asked them to share their last slice of pie. Once simple politeness morphed into a frenzy of avoidance. They set up distance and defensive measures that would make modern introverts proud. The weight of fear pressed heavily in the air as neighbours began ostracising those who had the audacity to be ill. Anyone with a raspy voice was quickly quarantined. A simple flu morphed into a plague sentence. Not to mention the drama. If anyone even accidentally sneezed without iconography of an exorcism to lift the spirits, you could bet they were a social pariah faster than you could say premature burial. Can you imagine? Scenarios where deep sighs of relief followed a stranger's healthy cough, echoing through the marketplace, only to shatter when they suddenly let out a guttural wheeze that reverberated like a battle cry? Or how about those family gatherings where everyone had to appease Aunt Gertrude and her constant sniffles while hanging wanly onto her every word, praying she doesn't end the evening by sharing a crust of stale bread? May the spirits protect us, you'd murmur, all the while eyeing that suspiciously sweaty jar of fig preserves on the table. So here you are, trying not to panic as yet another person discharges what may as well be a plague cannon. You squeeze your eyes shut, wishing for the days when a simple cough meant an impending change in the weather, not a harbinger of doom. In essence, the medieval way of life was one long sneeze of uncertainty, where the fear of infection was as infectious as any plague sweeping through. Time to invest in some good old-fashioned distance. Don't worry, it's only your neighbour's social distancing. 6 feet wasn't common, but it sure would have helped. The church, equal parts healer and hammer. It played a critical role in medieval medical systems, Ever wonder how many prayers it took to cure a sneeze? Spoiler alert, a lot more than a doctor's appointment ever would, in an age where the mysteries of the human body were as murky as the local river, and the word anatomy was often just an obscure term tossed around in scholarly circles. The church stepped in like a benevolent overlord. Instead of your run-of-the-mill doctor's visit, you were more likely to find yourself kneeling in church, asking God to zap your ailments away with the divine power of faith. Because why consult a physician when you could just beg for an intervention from above? Picture this. It's a gloomy day in 1361. You're standing in a village church, the smell of damp stone mingling with stale incense, as Father Gregory prepares to work a little holy magic on your headache. You send a quick prayer to St. Jude, the patron saint of hopeless cases, while the congregation murmurs behind you. You can almost hear the thoughts of your neighbours. Did you hear? John's been struck down with gout again. Probably not practising enough self-denial. Yes, the moral implications of illness were heavy as a sack of potatoes. Good health was considered a gift from God, and a nasty cough could easily be viewed as divine punishment. Talk about pressure! In the medieval mind, sickness was rarely just a biological problem. It was intrinsically linked to your moral standing. You weren't just dealing with the flu, you were grappling with the very fabric of your worthiness. The belief was that bad air and foul vapours, known as miasmas, were responsible for illnesses, but those who strayed from God's paths were particularly susceptible. Hence, if you found yourself in the throes of a terrible cold, it might really just be a symptom of your sinning left unconfessed. Thus, the church became both sanctuary and judgment chamber, blending devotion and disaster like a medieval smoothie of suffering. Not only were prayers said to alleviate physical afflictions, but many clergy members would offer remedies that often leaned heavily on the theological spectrum. You could expect incense mixed with a touch of holy water to do wonders. What bites you? Why, it's just the devil! Let's offer some penance and pray it away. Your herbal brew likely came with an unspoken sermon on the dangers of idleness and lust naturally. And could you believe it? A little pilgrimage could also help fix that persistent ailment, because if your knee was still acting up, what better way to remedy it than to journey 20 miles on it, right? That'll teach you. The church's hold didn't just rely upon theological motivations. No, my friend. It took a marketing team of saintly proportions to build mystique around health. They would offer relics, bits of bone from saints rumoured to have miraculous healing powers, to sway those desperate for relief. Oh, you've got a cough. Have you tried rubbing your forehead on St. Fiona's toe? It's reputed to cure anything from mumps to melancholy. Some of these relics became popular travel destinations, turning medieval medicine into an incantation of prayer and pilgrimage. Will it work? Who knows? But it adds some theatrics to your pain. If you were of the wealthier persuasion, your path to salvation and healing was even more glamorous. Enter the apothecary, essentially your medieval pharmacist who took the church's directives and added a dash of creative breeding when it came to concoctions. Imagine tratando to find the cure for your chronic woes, while your apothecary mixes up potions with a side of questionable herb recommendations. Just sprinkle this powdered chicken foot in your stew and pray your neighbours don't catch wind of it. Typically, it was a wild mix of spiritual and herbal, paired with just the right amount of superstition. However, before we whisk ourselves away in blind reverie of medieval merriment, let's not ignore the dark side. The church's insistence on the divine origins of health also meant that when the plague hit, the blame would also swing wildly. Those poor peasants caught up in the plague would hear sermons denouncing their moral failures while struggling to stay alive. It was a delightful confusion of absolution and agony. Ever tried dying with dignity while someone tells you God is punishing you? As the years rolled on, the rising academic interest and scientific exploration began to clash comically with the church's teachings. While they sowed the seeds of the past, the future of modern medicine loomed just around the corner, like a dogged neighbour refusing to get out of the way. Yet even as the plagues raged, the church still held its grip. Because after all, who knew if a little prayer might just be the ticket to survive the latest wave of illness? And so, in the monstrous medley of medieval healing, the church continued to dance the cha-cha between faith and fever, leaving behind a legacy both hopeful and haunting for generations to come. Hold on to your hats. These plague doctors lived in shabby accommodations that often doubled as doctors' offices. Ever thought of setting up a practice amidst the smell of aging potatoes and iron pots? Welcome to medieval living at its finest. Your home is a charming little hovel, a snug wooden hut with walls that lean as if they're trying to huddle together for warmth. The roof, thatched with straw, occasionally sprinkles you with rain when the clouds have had a bit too much to drink. It's cosy in a way that forces you to form an emotional attachment to the dampness. Welcome to your medieval abode, where everything doubles as multi-purpose and hygiene is an abstract concept more likely to be found in a distant future than in your present reality. As you step inside, the air is thick with a concoction of smells. A dash of musty hay, a whiff of a goat that might be staying for the weekend, and an unshakable odour of last night's vegetable soup that never really left the pot. Who needs air fresheners when you have a natural bouquet of all the unfortunate decisions that led to your current living situation? It's like your home has entered an aroma competition and lost to several dubious entrants. The interior resembles a chaotic museum of desperation. In one corner, there's a rickety wooden table that has seen far better days. It might have been a prized possession at some point, but now it's just a place for scribbled notes on how to treat the plague with questionable potions made from a suspicious assortment of herbs. Who knew that preparing for the worst included mixing herbs that could put even the heartiest stomach to difficult work? Your mortar and pestle sit beside it like loyal companions, constantly fussing over the eclectic mix of ingredients you collected, while trying to play mediator between nature and your patient's fears. And let's not forget your medical decor. Jars filled with more dubious concoctions and natural ingredients than you can remember. Crusty bandages that may or may not be biodegradable, and wooden spoons that have surely long lost their original purpose. One is even chipped, which might suggest it had a rough encounter with a particularly stubborn garlic bulb. Definitely not great for presentation in the medical world. You're not sure what half of the odd ingredients actually do, but hey, giving a potion a mysterious name is half the fun. Odor-rotting turnip sounds like it could have some market potential, right? The light, or lack thereof, trickles through a small window that you haven't bothered to clean since the last great rain. Dust sits complacently on the sills, like it's formed a long-term tenant agreement, and at night, your flickering oil lamps cast eerie shadows, which is quite fitting considering you've successfully scared at least half the local children into believing the plague is merely a curse upon anyone who dares wander too close to your abode. On the rare occasion you do have visitors, you can almost hear the audible sigh of relief as they leave, convinced that nothing in this house could have possibly gotten them sick because of the sheer squalor alone. As you mentally draft a list of housewarming potions for new patients, one thought keeps bobbing to the surface. This is no ordinary physician's office. This is less about healing and more about surviving amidst gossip. In a world where the plague ruled the roost, and everyone else was just trying to find the latest remedy, your home became an impromptu theatre for bizarre tales, exchanged between the wary townsfolk and their slightly less than reputable doctor. Just when you think the chaos of your space can't get any more absurd, the next patient arrives, likely carrying a new assortment of ailments that will require a healthy dose of herbs and some improvisation on your part. Let's face it, a medieval practice isn't all fun and games, but it has its moments. A bit like juggling chainsaws while riding a unicycle. And thus, as you prepare to brew another magical remedy, you remind yourself that this delightful little hovel is not just your home. It's a testament to resilience, ingenuity, and perhaps just a smidge of madness as you navigate the tumultuous seas of medieval medicine, all while ensuring the neighbours remain blissfully ignorant of what a true plague doctor resides within these walls. Welcome to your new digs, my friend. Just don't forget to hold your breath before entering. Let's talk numbers, shall we? The Black Death saw millions perish in a horrifyingly short time. Prepare for tales of fallen cities, towns wiped off the map, and the unfortunate doctors who had to reckon with the reality of counting bodies. What does a plague death toll even sound like? Spoiler, not good. Picture this. You've just been appointed the town's official body counter. Definitely not the resume booster you were hoping for. You've got a quill, an inkpot, and the grim task of tallying up fatalities in a village that's basically become a ghost town. Sort of takes the fun out of what's your job small talk at parties. As grim as it was, the task of counting wasn't just a game of macabre bingo. Each tick on the parchment marked a life cut too short by fever, sores, and an unfortunate lack of effective medicine. Imagine waking up one day to hear your neighbour's coughing fits escalate into an unfortunate gone forever scenario. Next thing you know, you're running around, tossing in tally marks like you're the world champion of doomkeeping. It was like being cast in the worst version of a tragic play, but without the dramatic monologues or any chance of a standing ovation. The scenes you witness while doing the difficult work could haunt your dreams for weeks. You'd wander through streets once vibrant, now eerily silent, counting the unrecognisable forms folded awkwardly in makeshift graves. You might even catch a glimpse of someone you knew, lying still under a hastily thrown blanket that looked vaguely like Grandma Edna's best quilt. That is, if Grandma Edna was known for her questionable colour choices and excellent ability to attract rodents. Is that really how her story ends, you'd wonder, as the smell of decay wafts through the air? A pungent reminder that life doesn't always deal a fair hand, and as you labour through lifeless bodies, you'll start contemplating the insurance payouts that never came. Well, if I check off one more tally, I guess that means I'm going to be sleeping in a burlap sack tonight, you'd ponder. Suddenly you start feeling a real connection with those who had passed, as if each tally was made with a strand of the hair from your own head. How many families were affected? How many children were left orphaned? The numbers become real and raw, almost suffocating in their enormity. As towns emptied like a poorly planned potluck dinner, you could hear the almost comedic, but entirely tragic, reactions among the living. "Uh-oh, another one," came the speckled comment of dread. Imagine a cheery game of bingo, only instead of bingo, someone screams, "Guess who's next on the list?" The joke quickly turns into a painful realization that no one really knows who will still be around tomorrow. Spoiler alert, it's often not the strong and mighty, but the frail and frazzled. Of course, as the body count climbed, so did the panic. Entering a village practically became an Olympic sport of survival. Plague doctors themselves were tasked not only with treating patients, but also with ensuring that they conducted the grim tally, equally bewildered by the overwhelming amount of paperwork. Imagine converting a few hundred Grim Reapers into bureaucrats overnight. The aftermath created a flurry of urgency. "I swear I'm not a numbers guy," one might exclaim as he accidentally miscounts for the 6th time, leading the village into a spiral of more accusations and chaos. And how did the local clergy respond to all this death? Well, imagine solemnly delivering the Sunday sermon while the congregation looks more like a collection of walking corpses than upright citizens. The good news? With all those folks in the afterlife business, they had plenty to talk about during Sunday service. Don't worry, I'm sure everyone is in a better place. Well, maybe not in this town, but in general. Finally, after tallying the toll, you'd slowly realise the depth of sorrow stretches further than the walls of your immediate neighbourhood. History shows that the haunting echoes of the death toll whispered through generations, forever altering the landscape of social consciousness, pride, and community. How about we express our grief creatively, was a common undertone. But in a time when singing the blues looked remarkably like sweeping the streets for your lost neighbours, humour became the last bastion of hope. So in the end, when you try to count those bodies and find yourself lost in the morose math of mortality, remember this: you're not just tallying the past, you're sketching out the future, one tally at a time. And through all the calamity, laughter was the only antidote that provided a glimmer of relief in this absurd theatre known as life. Ready for a serious topic? Public health. Insert your favourite medieval dance here. Death and decay paired with public promotion for safety. That's right, they were all about advising the populace on staying safe, because yelling "stay indoors" totally worked. Picture this. You're in a bustling market square, teeming with peasants milling about like a horde of confused bees. In the background, a plague doctor positioning himself like a gloomy performer on the village stage, meticulously waving his arms as if conducting an orchestra of chaos. It's both too bizarre to believe and impossibly amusing, as if someone mistakenly thought that the solution to a major illness was simply to holler at the top of their lungs while dressed like a crow going through a midlife crisis. Now imagine the locals at the market haggling over turnips, while feigning horror at the doctor's proclamations of doom. "Behold," he shouts, "refrain from touching anything you find in the vicinity of sick folks, especially if it's their pottage. They've got a serious case of not going to make it." You can already hear the rustling of skirts and trousers, the shuffling of feet as interested villagers take the hint and sidle away from the stagnant bowl of questionable stew. Little did they realise that avoiding the soup was not likely to guarantee their survival. Rather, it was all about dodging the mounting horror of a pestilence that had come to claim many a soul in the dead of night. Medieval public health announcements were truly an art form. Picture a town crier, fervently clang-clanging his bell as he shouts, "If you cough, you're dead. If you're sneezing, it's curtains for you." Can you blame the folks for weaving through the streets like panicked mice trying to escape from a hungry cat? But the closest they would come to a remedy was a suspicious potion made from rat tails and wildflower petals. "Drink this," the doctor insisted as the townspeople winced in unison at the thought of putting that sludge down their throats. "It works, I swear on my plague mask." Right, because nothing says "trust me" like a beaked mask obscuring all human features, primed for horror movie status. When the plague hit, fear spurred a frenzy of strange and often counterproductive policies. Cities implemented quarantine measures that were, in theory, intended to keep the sick away from the healthy, almost like a twisted game of musical chairs where everyone had to race for the last functional seat. But really, it looked more like citizens tiptoeing around their neighbours as though they had rabid squirrels strapped to their backs. If you had any symptoms, the local authorities would toss you into a small room that they casually called isolation, a pleasant name for what was essentially a dank and dark dungeon big enough for just a prayer of breathing space. As the plague wreaked havoc, towns sometimes resorted to extreme measures, making public examples of the unfortunate few who dared defy the rules. If you were caught wandering out of your designated safe zone to procure last-minute groceries, well, let's just say medieval justice could be brutal. You might find yourself subjected to punishments that would make even a hardened criminal quiver, such as being publicly scolded, and subjected to a chorus of disapproving clucks from the local populace. "Oh look, it's the reckless cabbage thief," children would mock, as though you were some form of medieval folk villain playing tricks in the village square. In yet another twist of humour, the public health army often resorted to rituals that were equal parts ridiculous and terrifying. Community gatherings became worship sessions of sorts, where prayers and incantations supposedly warded off illness. You'd find villagers joining together, singing praises to divine figures as they waved garlic and onions in the air like some bizarre health spa, hoping to dilute the lurking despondency lurking in every shadow. So, in an era of death that swept through the land faster than a gaggle of geese, public health policies turned absurdity into a survival tactic. The town's only defence was a mix of half-baked remedies, maddening rituals, and a splash of genuine fear. While science was in its infancy, locals crafted their defences with sheer willpower, creating a grotesquely humorous dance with death, playfully attempting to preserve life in a time when survival felt as precarious as balancing atop a tightrope over a pit of vengeful rats. It's incredible, really, just how much human ingenuity was on display, striving to overcome ludicrous situations with the sincerity of a peasant, convinced that maybe, just maybe, his role as a trial-and-error human shield would ultimately secure survival for all. And while many of these measures may seem ludicrous now, they faced an overwhelming horror head-on, and did what they could with what little they had. With plague doctors around, quacks still found a way to shine. Immerse yourself in the odd world of non-medical healers who offered remedies that sometimes came straight from the rat's backside, or perhaps just a leaf they found on the ground. Imagine yourself back in 14th century Europe. The air is thick with despair, death lingers around every corner, and the plague is making its rounds like a particularly persistent neighbourhood dog with a penchant for raiding trash cans. In times like these, fancy degrees and scientific knowledge didn't mean squat. People were desperate, and that desperation became a breeding ground for hucksters and charmers eager to cash in on the chaos. Meet Yorick the Rat Whisperer, a self-proclaimed healer who believed that nothing cured the plague quite like a handful of herbs, brazenly lifted from his neighbour's untidy garden. His magical concoction might involve wormwood, dried-out weeds, and a strong belief in fairy dust. What's that? You don't believe in fairy dust? Well, neither did he, but it made for a great marketing point. As a modern comparison, it's like that one friend who believes tea tree oil will fix anything from a headache to a broken heart. Each pitch became wildly embellished. Poor Yorick could charm a rat into thinking he was its long-lost brother. With little regulation and even less knowledge of how the human body functioned, quacks became the unlikely champions of medieval medicine. Take Agatha the herbalist, a woman who swore up and down that her poultice of mouldy bread and river water was the secret to eternal life. While we know that anything growing on stale bread was more likely to kill you than save you, Agatha's clientele didn't seem to mind. Her customers left with ribbons of hope tied around their necks, if not their sanity. Ever wonder how she did it? Simple, she had a way with words. Feel light as a feather, your ailments will float away like a dandelion in the wind, was her motto. And honestly, who could resist the imagery? Quackery didn't stop at mere herbs and hope. There were also good old-fashioned medical experiments. Have fun brainstorming pairing rods made from elderberries and goose feathers with a wellness mantra. Not convinced? How about a bloodletting that would leave you feeling refreshed, like an old rag after a good wringing? Sure, your neighbours might question why you look like you just emerged from a backyard mud wrestling contest, but they didn't realise your healer was actually sticking you for sport. The quacks cleverly preyed on the public's fears and ignorance, offering outrageous cures for a price that would give your local coffee shop a run for its money. "Bring forth your ailments, and I shall take thy money," they proclaimed. Consider Ethel the Enchantress, who claimed her magic potions could turn back time. Not literally, of course, but surely you'd feel younger after spending your life savings in her ramshackle hut. The potion? Just a cocktail of stale ale and what she called mystical spices. Lucky for Ethel, no one kept a diary back then to recount the many unfortunate experiences that bloomed from her magic. Besides, who would dare question the golden chalice of ignorance? Oh, and let's not forget the snake oil salesman. Yes, they existed even back then, legitimately claiming to sell elixirs that could cure just about anything from gout to a nasty case of pessimism. They were the rock stars of alternative medicine. The only hitch? You might end up with a case of untraceable death. Just like in today's world, they had a way of selling solutions that were utterly invented, perfectly packaged for anyone willing to hand over their coin. Feel the weight of your troubles lift, if not through magic, definitely through bankruptcy. Now contrast this with our fond memories of a time where the local apothecary, armed with modest herbs and questionable ethics, started to feel like home. With plague doctors in the mix, their work had inadvertently set the stage for a bizarre shakedown of healing arts. You've got the medically dubious and the outright insane dancing together in a beautifully chaotic ballet, temporarily disguising their collective ignorance with the single string of hope that just maybe miracles happen right outside the window of a muck-covered hut. Thus, the rise of quackery flourished in shadows and light, a mishmash of medieval witchcraft, folk remedies, and light-hearted marketing strategies aimed at staving off death and despair. After all, who wouldn't want to give Yorick a couple of coins for the chance at immunity amidst a plague? Ultimately, while the plague doctors poked around in discomforting science, these charming quacks were cooking up weirdly optimistic ideas and leeching their way into history's heart, if not its textbooks. So raise a glass of mystical liquid and toast to the eccentric heroes of the medieval healing arts, who will forever hold a place in the annals of human struggle for health and sanity. What does isolation look like when you're battling the plague? Discover the human experience of quarantine. Spoiler alert, it doesn't include Netflix or snacks. Also, be prepared to hear about all the odd traditions people made to cope. You see, back in the days of the plague, when life was less about avocado toast and more about avoiding your neighbour's rat-infested shack, quarantine meant 5 months of limited advantages hardened by the reality that fresh air was more of a ghost story than a luxury. Imagine it now. You wake up in your wooden hovel, the sun shining through cracks in the walls, almost as if taunting you. No newspapers, no social media, just a bunch of dusty rafters and the smell of last week's stew hanging in the air like a long-forgotten bad decision. You thought you'd spend your days reading or honing your long-lost pottery skills, but all you really managed to accomplish was surviving day by day in a quarantine that lacked the basicities of comfort. Neighbours would constantly knock on your door, nervously peering in as if you had the plague chat at your fingertips. "Did you hear about the Johnsons?" they'd whisper, glancing side to side as though the very mention of their name might summon the spirit of the Black Death. "Their chickens went kaput, and the crows are circling. It's a sign." Yes, nothing says good morning, quite like the casual judgment of your community. You couldn't just send them a meme. You were stuck nodding and pretending you weren't already calculating the minutes until they left your door. And let's not even get started on personal hygiene. With the church reinforcing the idea that bathing would invite the plague into your very pores, showering was out of the question. You'd have to make do with whatever excuse you could muster to stave off those awkward visits. "I am preserving my health." It's a medieval detox routine. Much like modern-day detoxes, you were certain that your friends could smell the cheese you'd had a week ago. But hey, sacrifice is a virtue, isn't it? As time dragged on, communities turned to various odd rituals to farm some semblance of normalcy. Picture groups of peasants gathering in circles, drumming loudly to ward off the evil vapours they believed floated around them like pesky mosquitoes. They'd chant, stomp their feet, and perhaps drum nearly as loudly as the clap of a thunderstorm, while simultaneously trying to convince themselves that their dance was way more than just an outlet for pent-up frustration. But you wouldn't quite call it a party unless your idea of fun involves shuffling around a dirt floor while trying not to trip over the neighbour's goats. Not to be outdone in the art of coping, some individuals took to desperately inventing bizarre rituals. Let's take old Edith next door. When the quarantine struck, she declared her home a purity zone, sticking garlic cloves everywhere, convinced they'd ward off the plague better than any physician. Clearly she was not invited to your next dinner party. She'd swing open her windows and hang herbs to dry as if they were laundry, while the sweet scent of garlic mixed poorly with the stale air, creating a bouquet that no one could unsmell. You'd believe these quirks would leave your house at the top of the most sought-after quarantine leaderboard. Alas, the reality was that you were now an unwilling participant in a bizarre social experiment aiming to see who could remain tolerable while surrounded by mounting piles of creators the neighbours offered you to curb your boredom. News travelled slowly, yet somehow rumours always spread quickly. Did you hear Toby forgot which end of the bread to slice? Please. The horrors of quarantine never ended, only evolved. On top of all that, there were the restrictions on travelling. There was no skipping down to the local tavern or raiding your favourite market for a sudden apple fix. The streets echoed with the silence of loss, breached only by the errant cry of a chicken or a neighbour's sneezing fit, a curious callback to the old days when lobsters were cooked only in the fires of the tavern. Eventually, once the plague loosened its infernal grip, the quirky quarantine traditions faded into history like the stench of the didn't shower. Yet those odd habits and eccentric precautions gave everyone something to remember amid the darkness. A strange cosmic reminder that isolation may be uncomfortable, but it bogged down their spirits just enough to lift their laughter. It's a wild time in history, where isolation didn't have to mean solitude, but rather became a dance with neighbours, with an alternative universe's worth of bizarre rituals. Who knew that in battling the plague you'd also learn that humour, when shared, sparked hope, even in the worst of times? Let's step back and consider how the natural world intertwined with the plague phenomenon. Prepare for tales of the starling droppings that proposed a certain someone near death. That's right. Back in the days of yore, a sneeze might mean more than just an allergy. It could be the sign of a big, bad rat invasion. Picture this. You're strolling through your village minding your own business, when suddenly a heavy stench wafts your way. Is that the scent of last night's turnip stew or something far worse? Spoiler alert, it's the lingering odour of plague-riddled vermin inviting you to a game of Russian roulette with your health. Rats, those unwelcome guests in every medieval home, were the ultimate party crashers. They didn't just sneak in with their little pink noses and whip-smart tails. They brought along their best friends, the fleas. These little bloodsuckers were the true life embodiment of first-class pests. Imagine you're a flea, blissfully hopping between rat and human, taking bites and laughing maniacally at how you became a medieval celebrity by merely biting someone. But the internal monologue of a flea isn't all fun and games. Sure, you might feel invincible, but doom looms on the horizon. One day you bite a person, and suddenly that person stops moving. Oops, looks like your buffet turned into a curse of doom. Now, let's not forget about the birds. Yes, you heard me right. Our feathered friends were not as innocent as they seemed. Certain birds were the unsung harbingers of despair, especially starlings who, much like annoying relatives, had a knack for showing up just when things started to smell a bit too good. Ever notice the way birds flock to a village? their twitters echoing like they're gossiping about the day's freshest corpses. Well, let me assure you, they were far more concerned about dinner, grub, vermin, and anything else within pecking range. And when they feasted on the pest population, you guessed it, they unknowingly got a taste of the plague, turning them into carriers of death themselves. Wait, but how does all this fit together, you ask, scratching your head? Easy. The birds, the fleas, the rats. It was a veritable plague cocktail. The fleas would jump from the rats to the birds, creating a transcendent buffet line of disease delight. Imagine a fashion show where the models prance about, showcasing their latest pest-infested threads while offering complimentary bites. The birds and rats made the perfect matchmaking service, selectively hunting down humans like they were the newest addition to the dating pool. This society was a feast for nature until it was, well, not. But fear not, the natural world wasn't just a horrific nightmare, it served a purpose. The surviving humans who managed to dodge both rats and germs began to rethink their relationship with their environment. Birds and bees were everywhere, flitting about and buzzing at a social distance. Who knew that? Vibrant flowers and pollinators played a role. Amid all the darkness, brilliant blooms managed to thrive, growing, thriving, and, oh right, drawing in the very insects responsible for spreading diseases. A true circle of life scenario, sunshine, flowers, and a sprinkle of malady creating an epic saga, reminiscent of a sitcom featuring questionable companions. As plague doctors waltz through streets, protecting themselves with beaked masks and potpourri-filled pouches, the greenhorns among them found themselves turning to nature, attempting to extract herbal remedies from the very weeds that surrounded them. Sound crazy? Well, it was a little better than shoving garlic up your nose. The natural world began playing double duty as a source of both danger and salvation. The same fields that harboured pesky rodents might just be the ticket to a home-based herbal remedy, or so they hoped. So, ultimately, the relationship between the natural world and the plague, while terrifying, was surprisingly intricate. In the end, humans learned to leverage this hostile environment. Underneath those layers of dirt and chaos, resilient communities slowly emerged, discovering the great potential contained within the very flora and fauna that had once threatened their existence. Who knew that a sneeze could lead to new cures? Perhaps through all of that medieval muck, we were destined to emerge more enlightened, a tad scratched up, but hey, history may come with a few extra germs, but it's also rich with lessons. Show me the aftermath of the plagues. Who doesn't want to examine history's slow collection of bodies and the sad tales of cadavers scattered across the countryside? It's a real horror show out here, my friends. Picture this. Entire towns turned into graveyards almost overnight. A sickly panorama of hastily dug pits packed with folks who had just yesterday been fighting over the last loaf of stale bread. Once lively markets and bustling streets now lay silent, like the awkward aftermath of a family reunion where everyone suddenly decided to leave early. The stench of mortality hung in the air, an unwelcome reminder of a party no one invited. You might be wondering how people coped with this grim reality. Imagine navigating life in a world where death knocked on everyone's door with an all-too-generous invitation. Townsfolk didn't just send their loved ones off with a wave and a see you later. Oh no, they were faced with the distressing duty of dragging corpses to mass graves, sometimes using a wheelbarrow, the medieval version of an Uber, but for corpses. Did it stink? Absolutely. You could have been miles away and still caught a whiff that had you rethinking that sandwich you were about to eat. But hey, in times like these, the bar for social etiquette drops faster than a peasant's pants in a public latrine. Now, let's not forget about the emotional toll this plague left behind. With every grave dug and every neighbour lost, communities faced the heart-wrenching task of rebuilding not just their streets, but their very souls. It's like attempting to piece together a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces mysteriously missing. People often turned to faith. They prayed harder than ever while simultaneously eyeing their neighbours with a mix of respect and suspicion. Because after losing so many, who's to say if that cough you just heard was just a regular cough, or a death knell? "You sure about that cup of stew, Agnes?" you'd ask, trying to gauge whether that enigmatic twitch in her eye was just a quirk, or if she was harbouring the plague. And while the living struggled to cope, the dead surely weren't left unaccounted for. What's left behind is an intriguing phrase, especially when it pertains to the daily grind of medieval life post-plague. Enter the Death Sanitation Committee, a group of townsfolk tasked with overseeing burials and ensuring that any leftover bodies didn't pose a health risk to the living. This committee made interesting social gatherings, filled with resounding laughter and the occasional fainting spell from onlookers who really couldn't handle the sight of reality. Can you picture them in their best fashion, riddled with anxiety and fear, yet still sporting stylish beards as if they just stepped off a painting fresh from the Renaissance? Living through the aftermath also came with its own set of rewards, if you can call them that. Those who survived nested into newfound roles. Some became the replacement breadwinners for families that had collapsed under the weight of their loss. Others opened new businesses, chucking curses at fate while marketing potions and remedies. Because after all, what could be more appealing than that bottled miracle tonic that claims to ward off future plagues? Would you like to buy some, dear friend? One sip, and you'll be at the top of the health pyramid, right below mouldy cheese. Despite all the chaos, humanity still found ways to revel in its love for absurdity, even trying to profit from the plague's misery. Juxtaposed against the backdrop of death, tales of survivors and their quirky remedies became the stuff of legends. People swirled tales of the plague saints and miracle waters as if divine forces had suddenly turned into savvy marketers. And can you blame them? Who wouldn't want to cash in on a good story alongside the remnants of despair? So, as life resumed its quirky waddle forward, cities began to rebuild slowly but surely, often borrowing from the past while reflecting on the hard-learned lessons. As strange as it is, the plague left behind opportunities for rebirth. A dark reminder that sometimes from the ashes of chaos, a little bit of light shines through the cracks, guiding the way toward an unsteady but persistent future. And that future? Well, it's just another chapter in this absurd book called Humanity that keeps on reading, one plague at a time. How did all this bizarre behaviour eventually inform our knowledge of health today? You'll find out about the quirky connections between the past and present while wading through odd and contradictory chapters of medical history. Let's take a stroll through the medieval kaleidoscope of medicine, where healing and harming often went hand in hand, much like that time your best friend served you dinner they proclaimed was gourmet. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. But back to the doctors, the medieval ones, not the ones still confused about avocado toast. In the medieval era, medicine was not just a profession. It was an extraordinary blend of philosophy, superstition, and trial and error experimentation. Imagine a world where the local barber doubled as the surgeon, wielding scissors and scalpels like a 2-for-1 special. Come for a haircut, stay for your bloodletting, no refunds. One moment, you're getting a fresh cut, and in the next, the barber's sawing off your infected leg. Talk about a dramatic transformation. Remember that charming barber-sturgeon combo by the time you're due for a haircut, though. Doctors believed in balancing the body's humours, blood, phlegm, black bile and yellow bile, like a medieval cocktail party. except no one truly knew what they were mixing. Too much of one humour, and it was off to the bloodletting. Perhaps they should have considered hosting a dance instead. After all, a boisterous jig might have wheeled away that excess bile. The humours were like a medieval version of Keeping Up with the Kardashians. Over the top, often confusing, and you'd have a headache by the end, but somehow people kept tuning in. Despite glaring flaws, certain practices from this era laid the groundwork for modern medicine. Take the use of herbal remedies, for example. Even though many concoctions contained about as much science as an overhyped social media wellness trend, some actually worked. Ancient practitioners would grind up herbs and spices, like a medieval chef who'd just lost a bet, and administer herbal teas with more potential than your cousin's kombucha business. Herbs like willow bark, which contains salicylic acid, a precursor to aspirin, were utilised way before Big Pharma had any say in the matter. Thanks to those feather-cloaked herbalists collecting their magical plants, we can now enjoy headache relief without bloodletting ourselves into oblivion. Fast forward a few centuries, and we have the rise of universities that introduced more formal medical training, though one still had to endure quite a bit of nonsensical theory, mixed with some actual factual content. Picture students crowded in classrooms that looked like remnants of a bizarre Renaissance fair, scribbling notes on human anatomy while some professor regaled them with tales of how to ward off the plague with a clove of garlic and a healthy heaping of pure thoughts. It was a strange environment where students learned more myth than medicine and graduated to become the doctors seriously questioning if they could sprinkle pixie dust over a festering wound instead of prescribing antibiotics. The Renaissance brought about a soft revolution, paving the way for a more systematic approach to medicine. That's right, they ditched the avian get-up and handed out actual textbooks instead of a grimy scroll from the village shaman. However, it wasn't exactly an overnight transformation. Students continued to study the classics, where Galen's teachings loomed large. This was the era of let's dissect a few corpses meets medieval karaoke night. Like a reluctant karaoke singer, the medical profession was still ghosting its way through many of ancient practices while desperately trying to sound good. By the time we reached the Enlightenment, we saw a collective revelation that science might hold some value after all. The era wiped away some of the cobwebs that had collected on the scalpel over centuries. Anatomical studies flourished, and the scientific method gained popularity. Finally, doctors deemed it less risky to actually look at human bodies and gather empirical evidence rather than relying on divine guidance and old wives' tales. Imagine physicians starting to realise that maybe a sharp object wouldn't fix everything. Who knew? Nevertheless, many medieval beliefs lingered long into modern times. Some people still tucked garlic around their thresholds just in case, while others held on tightly to superstition like a security blanket. After all, if it worked for grandma, why mess with tradition? Motivated by that same logic, we're still left with quirky habits like the belief that a dropped fork means company is coming. Remember, for every modern medical advancement, there remains a sprinkle of absurdity anchored in our history, reminding us how far we've come, while urging us to not become completely devoid of humour in our medical practices. So here's the beautiful irony. We're still living among echoes of those strange medieval practices today. From pressing claims to herbal supplements to skeptically eyeing the emerging trends like magic crystals for pain relief, the evolution of medicine is a forever unfolding tale, a symphony of the bizarre, the brilliant, and the downright unbelievable. Just know, however, that next time your doctor squeezes your forehead while resisting the urge to consult the village healer, you can thank those wacky plague doctors for pioneering something akin to what we now know as healthcare. Cheers to that. Join me as we reflect on the lessons death teaches. Hold on tight. History may reveal how stubbornly humans engage with suffering, yet somehow find ways to laugh, love, and remember. As we navigate through the murky waters of history, one thing becomes crystal clear. Amidst the swirling chaos of the plague, people managed to adapt, survive, and even find humour. I mean, if you can't laugh while wearing a beaked mask and dodging death on every street corner, when can you? Consider the plague doctors, armed with their beaked masks, those back-to-nature health pioneers turned fashionistas. They looked like the avian love child of a witch and a birdwatcher. But what do you do when presented with death's constant reminder? You dance with it, dress the part, and serve the community, even if it means pretending you know the secret healing benefits of a sprig of parsley or a hunk of mouldy bread. Have you ever dealt with a stubborn cold, convinced that your aunt's herbal remedy could be the one to cure you? Welcome to medieval medicine, where hearty stew and outright superstition reigned supreme. And don't even get me started on public health. Picture a town bustling with gardy-loo shouts, followed by the plop of chamber pots being emptied into the streets. No wonder people had to find a way to laugh. If you could turn a blind eye to the gritty streets and still find solace in a shared joke over a bowl of questionable pottage, you were doing it right. Not to mention, anyone busy dodging flying debris from a double-decker latrine had their own survival tactics honed to perfection, namely, the ability to sprint for cover. Now, let's turn our attention to the earlier attempts at community relationships, where quirky gatherings turned into gossip sessions regularly mixed with rituals and perhaps a dash of portents. When life becomes a constant countdown to your next sneeze, who wouldn't lean into the bizarre? They sought meaning in the ridiculousness, clinging to the memories of the swirling dandelion seeds, hoping they'd trap a touch of divine favour. You think the social media age is rife with drama? Try swapping catastrophe stories while you huddle under a plague cart. Speaking of stories, let us not forget that humour itself serves as a valuable tool. Every comedic anecdote shared among neighbours acted as glue to hold communities together. Can you imagine setting out for a historical comedy night while fate strikes at your door daily? It's about as comforting as a bowl of bug-infested rice, yet people grinned and laughed, reflected in their own bitter realities. And as we meander into the realms of mortality, let's reflect on the power of resilience. Those communities didn't merely endure, they learned. Piecing together their shared struggles made surviving the plague a bit more bearable. It's like gathering around a fire to tell horror stories. Together, under a blanket of acceptance, they faced the shameful judgment of their lot and laughed. But like every quirky tale, the evidence lies not just in the absurd humour, but in how it highlights our humanity. Through shared excesses, be it in fish-laden stew or overly ambitious wine stains on clothing, they cultivated camaraderie. When everything else became slippery and precarious, they rooted themselves in the art of loving and laughing, finding levity even in despair. Imagine their conversations. Well, I narrowly dodged a plague this week, but I'm about 4 meals away from an emotional breakdown over the state of my socks. Life may have thrown them shadows, but they danced through them, supported each other's struggles, and ultimately kept the spirit alive. In closing, the tales of the plague, those bizarre, horrific, and somehow endearing tribulations, remind us that we, as humans, are remarkably adaptable. We possess the incredible ability to find joy amid chaos, humour in absurdity, and resilience against insurmountable odds. As you reflect on their lives, let's appreciate the moments of connection along this maze of human history. Because as long as we can share a laugh amidst life's many trials, we carry the lessons from the past straight to our hearts, a testament to our enduring spirit. What happened to the plume-covered comrades that used to roam the land? Their legacy still lives on in modern medicine, sort of. Not in the form of beaks, but in innovative healthcare practices. You see, those peculiar plague doctors, with their eerie beaked masks resembling something out of a gothic wildlife documentary, contributed more to healthcare than meets the showy eye of a feathered hat. Their methods, as nonsensical as they often were, laid the groundwork for how we approach public health and disease today, albeit with a tad less superstition and a whole lot more science. Can you imagine if we tackled modern medicine with the same flair for dramatic costumes? Now, let's dive into the bizarre notions these doctors had about diseases. The prevailing theory back then was something called miasma, essentially the belief that bad air caused illness. That's right, it was all about the not-so-sweet smell of death drifting through the streets. Imagine these doctors roaming around, flapping their capes, carrying poses, believing that a handful of lavender could fend off the foulest stench and keep the Black Death at bay. It's like someone showing up to a modern medical conference with a sagebrush, convinced it'll cure cancer. Spoiler, it won't. The truth is, they were half right. Good hygiene and fresh air are important, but charming scents alone couldn't seal the deal. They also practice bloodletting, a term that sounds far more poetic than it should. The guys in masks believe that draining blood from a patient could restore balance to their humours. Picture it. An ailment? Simply stick a leech on the patient and hope for the best. Nowadays, the leeches have a slightly more refined role in medicine as anticoagulants. Yes, those little squirmy guys have a comeback story. They're like the rock stars of modern medicine. Retrofitted for a gig at the hospital, ready to break the glass ceiling and bring that classic aesthetic back into play. Just think about the connections we inadvertently hold on to from those medieval times. Our doctors today still rely on observing symptoms and asking questions to diagnose illnesses, a practice that traces back to those very same beaked figures. The difference: now, we do it with technology, no longer needing a symbolic mask or a bizarre outfit. A fancy stethoscope and a secure Wi-Fi connection will do just fine. Imagine a 21st century doctor coming into your room wearing a full plague doctor outfit proclaiming, "Fear not, I'm here to check your humours." You'd probably just keep your appointment, but not without a good chuckle. You might wonder about how public health policies have roots from these feathered fellows. The Black Death prompted the development of quarantine practices and even the establishment of health boards designed to keep cities free from contagions. Hygiene and sanitation laws emerged as a response to the overwhelming mortality. If we hadn't experienced those grim times, we might still be sniffing at each other and wondering why the neighbour's chicken has developed an attitude problem. Still, some of their principles have stood the test of time, just with fewer bird motifs. The collaboration they fostered between various health professionals helped sow the seeds for modern interdisciplinary approaches. Think of today's doctors working alongside epidemiologists, nurses, nutritionists and therapists. The health of the populace depends on teamwork that even plague doctors would have appreciated, if only they could trade their beaks for scrubs. And let's not forget, with every ghosting from history comes a healthy dose of historical humour. Those plague doctors often double-dutied as social pariahs, ridiculed yet revered, much like that one distant relative who declares they're a life coach while having questionable business cards made from rain-soaked napkins. Their legacy reminds us that medicine evolves, often through trial, error, and a fair dash of chaotic creativity. So, as we tuck ourselves safely into our cosy beds with our modern sanitation, antibiotics, and ridiculously comfortable pyjamas, let's tip our hats, or masks, to the bizarre legacy of plague doctors. They roamed the land, bearing witness to the trials and tribulations of a humanity grappling with illness. They shaped the path towards modern health care while wearing strange costumes that would make Broadway jealous. And who knows, Maybe their feathered fashion statements were the key to inspiring future generations of doctors, not just to save lives, but also to entertain us with odd tales long after their beaked masks have vanished from history. Feel those woolly instincts awaken within as we ponder modern life's quirky ways. Are we really all that different from our medieval predecessors when it comes to strange home remedies? Uncork that medicine cabinet. Take a good look at those dubious tinctures and comforting balms we've amassed. Many modern cures are like the offspring of a medieval apothecary and your eccentric aunt with too many cats. Consider your own array of remedies. Did you save the remnants of that questionable turmeric concoction you promised would cure your tendinitis? How about those herbal teas, the ones steeping in funny-smelling bags, half of which have expired? It's amazing how the belief in old wives' tales never seems to fade, even with a degree in pharmacology. Now, imagine a medieval peasant who backed down to sniffing wild herbs that might cure the plague or, who knows, turn out to be more lethal than the illness itself. Just like your once magnificent but now dusty bottle of anti-aging serum, centuries-old remedies have an uncanny way of gathering dust until you're in desperate search for something, anything, to fend off your latest malaise. Remember that time you thought a mixture of milk, honey, and a sprinkle of cinnamon would ward off a cold? Guess what? The medieval folks were up to the same shenanigans, cooking up potions that would probably perform better as wallpaper remover than as a cure for anything. Imagine yourself inside a cosy medieval cottage, surrounded by hanging bundles of dried herbs, sage, lavender, and whatever else your neighbour found interesting that week. The air is filled with the smell of things you assume are healthy but mostly pungent. Next, take a moment to picture the local plague doctor swaggering in, oversized beak mask bobbing left and right as they announce they know just the thing for your cough. Oh, how comforting. A nice steaming potion conjured with a dash of desperation and a sprinkle of blind faith. This is essentially the medieval version of your favourite TikTok hack. Honestly, isn't your last rendezvous with a cough syrup that tasted suspiciously like liquidized cardboard just a smidge less reassuring? And speaking of potions, let's look at that classic gets rid of anything remedy. Pickle juice. Yes, my friends, taming your insatiable thirst for vinegar while simultaneously indulging in potential health benefits. Prove me wrong when I say they'd have snatched a bottle of that off the shelves back in medieval times, amidst the clamour for monk's hood and valerian root. The desperation in tackling everything from cramps to existential dread is pretty universal, isn't it? But this isn't just about surviving discomfort. It's about thriving in the curious, being a modern-day embodiment of the medieval alchemist, your own little pharmacologist extraordinaire, concocting elixirs to soothe whatever ails you, whether it's stress, heartburn, or that nagging suspicion you left the oven on. And let's face it, your modern equivalents include the ever-so-predictable, desperate dash for over-the-counter medicine. Who knew pain relief could come with a side of indecision and regret? As we traverse through this bizarre era where science meets superstition, it's important to remember the essence of it all. The medieval doctors didn't have access to lab tests, MRIs, or even a blog to complain about it. They relied on intuition, trial and error, and a long-standing belief in things that literally festered in the shadows. In many ways, their persistence reflects our own inclination for hope when it comes to wellness, however misguided. So the next time you're perusing those remedies for forgotten ailments, channel your inner medieval soul. Consider what those plague doctors would have done. Of course, with slightly less dramatic flair, unless you're feeling particularly theatrical. Perhaps whip out an ancient remedy or two. The art of self-care is often found in the unlikeliest of places. Scatter a few extra cloves into your tea, or practice the dance of self-love with a sage smudge. embrace the quirks of today while remembering that our ancestors walked a similar tightrope between fear and creativity. So when life gives you lemons, try a lemon and honey potion to soothe the modern world and just keep a beady-eyed elderberry or two handy. After all, history might be a bumpy ride, but at least we can laugh about it while navigating through the absurdities that continue to make us human. Step into the realm of the bizarre, and perhaps even take comfort in the fact that you're never alone in your search for that elusive, all-encompassing remedy, whether concocted in the heat of the moment or handed down through centuries of comedic experiments. Let's take a moment to recognise how laughter is the best medicine, even if distracted by death. Why endure suffering without a few well-placed giggles to keep things lively? Seriously, if those plague doctors and their bird-like outfits didn't make their patients chuckle, they'd be stuck with morbid patients who are too busy clutching their sides in agony to focus on getting better. In a world where death knocked on your door at every turn, a dash of humour was like a warm blanket thrown over the chilling cold of despair. Imagine this. You're in a crowded medieval town square, and in walks a plague doctor clad in a long-beaked mask. The sight is as fantastical as it is fear-inducing. Would it hurt to add a little whimsy? Perhaps he should have rolled out a red carpet, or perhaps performed a little plague jig, all while giving off an air of absolute absurdity. What if he whipped out a chicken instead of a cane, invoking laughter rather than dread? Perhaps his mantra should have been, "A plague a day keeps the laughter at bay." We see then that humour was not just about making light of serious situations. It was a necessary survival mechanism. People in the Middle Ages were living through the worst times imaginable. Plagues, famines, and witch trials. Amidst such calamity, a good chuckle could stave off fear, if only for a moment, like, "Ah yes, I'm suffering from the plague, but at least I don't have to deal with my neighbour's goats loudly fighting under my window." And let's not forget those delightful remedies. Ever wonder about the potions they concocted to appease suffering souls? One could imagine the informative pamphlet detailing the plague doctor's recommended household remedies, reading something like, "Need a quick fix? Try our special brew of goat's ear soup mixed with a dash of magic and a sprinkle of chicken foot. Guaranteed to cure what ails you, or just put you in a meat coma." Picture the hilarity of customers lining up for a potion that was likely half mushrooms and half whatever was left in the pantry. There's an artful irony in desperate people willingly swallowing the abominations they hoped would cure them. "Is it going to purge the plague or just my lunch?" they might have asked, only to be met with a cryptic smile from the plague doctor, who likely had no idea either. There's a rich vein of humour found in such absurdity that can't be understated. When misunderstandings reigned supreme in medicine, humour became an essential counterpart. Take, for example, the notorious bloodletting spans of medieval health practices. Sure, let's just drain your life force, and in return I'll whip you up a nice herbal tea. What could possibly go wrong? One can only hope that half of the doctors had a playful spirit while wielding their leeches, saying things like, "Just kidding, we only take the bad blood. The good stuff's for later, right?" And as much as humour was often directed at their eccentric remedies, it also served as a perfect avenue for social bonding. Each joke about the plague contributed to the human tapestry of coping mechanisms in the face of devastation. Think about the camaraderie formed over shared laughter amid the constant mourning. "You've got the plague. I've got the plague. When's the last time we both had a good giggle over dinner?" Perhaps that's why people started exchanging witticisms as a defence. A well-placed joke could help distract from the reality of death, a powerful antidote to despair. So you'd hear things like, "If you do see the light, just try to make it a friendly glow." Ultimately, laughter became a lifeline. an unexpected shield against the constant spectre of the grave. The very act of laughing can be surprisingly radical. It is an insurrection against the heaviness of existence. And let's be honest, how liberating is it to find a morsel of humour tucked away in our darkest moments? So, as you lie here tonight, snuggled under a pile of clean blankets, and possibly with a heat pack on your chest from an ill-timed meal, remember how those precious chuckles trail back through history. There's much to be said about the resilience humanity displays. It's a spirit worth celebrating. Because if those plague doctors taught us anything, it's that we might as well laugh through the chaos while sporting a beak that could double as a birdhouse. Ready to draw the curtain on your newfound love for absurd historical moments? You'll get to discover relatable quirks reminiscent of your own life. Yes, we're going full circle with a look at how those quirky plague doctors, draped in their bird get-ups, have flown into the hearts of 21st century humour. Who knew that the frightening figures your ancestors feared could turn into a comic goldmine today? Picture this: a modern-day doctor sporting a beak mask while dramatically declaring, "I've got a prescription for you, and it involves staying 6 feet away from your neighbour's pet parrot." Have you ever seen TikTok videos where someone claims to have a remedy involving something entirely random, like a spoonful of honey and a gallon of pickle juice? Turns out medieval remedy enthusiasts were way ahead of the trend. Back then they believed that a handful of herbs mixed with substances best left undiscussed, like pulverised lizard feet, were the cure-all for every ailment under the sun. Today you can find people on social media touting the healing powers of everything from crystals to bone broth. But honestly, would you trust those recommendations from anyone who mistook feathered attire for medical advice? Imagine how far the lineage of these charmingly misguided medical practices has come. To think that your run-of-the-mill plague doctor might have kicked off a long-standing tradition of using strange ingredients for potion-like remedies. It's almost poetic. If only they had discovered the magic of CBD oil, instead of insisting that doctor meant fearlessly facing a rat infestation while calling it a healthcare practice. Meanwhile, here you are, scrolling through memes featuring beak-masked fellows offering free massages in exchange for rations of stale bread. And when you think about it, why did we find these medieval blunders harsh instead of hilarious? If the cheaper footwear of the day could evoke memories of last year's accidental purchases on clearance, call it medieval shoe sales. Imagine how easily you could slip into that era's mindset. After all, how different are our struggles today when navigating awkward social interactions or unsatisfying career trajectories compared to a doctor awkwardly insisting that cabbage leaf poultices would save you from the Black Death? Speaking of social gatherings, picture this: a gathering not of friends sipping artisanal coffee, but rather a collection of plague doctors trying to huddle around a table full of questionable herbal potions. What's this one? Oh, just some ground batwing. Cured my cousin's hiccups. Ah, classic medieval problem-solving skills. Aren't we all just two bad suggestions away from chaotic gatherings that resemble a completion of which ingredients would scare even your houseplant? It's the little things, a beak here, an oversized tunic there, that blur the lines between their past and our present, while they might have relied on musty tomes for their remedies. We've become experts in Googling how to make my hair stay in place without spending money, while prancing around in our plush loungewear instead of itchy wool cloaks. Binge-watching modern adaptations of medieval tales also reveals that these quirky characters, who were once feared, have transformed into beloved sitcoms akin to your family dinners right before someone drops the bowl of mashed potatoes. So, what's the takeaway here? We've arrived at a point where mingling humour and history could teach us to better understand ourselves, complete with all the warts and feathers. Those beak-faced doctors aren't just relics of a grim past. They embody the resilience of humanity, the willingness to craft solutions even as things fall apart. They remind us that, much like how you might tackle Monday morning with a feigned smile and a cup of coffee that's more lukewarm than fresh, our ancestors also faced their absurd realities with a sense of humour and some peculiar outfits. So, the next time you stare at an eye-catching meme about an ancient remedy that sounds suspiciously similar to what your cat might try at tea time, realise those quirky parallels. You're sharing an unexpected bond with those oversized birds that walked among us, trying to keep those pesky germs at bay, while sporting insults that probably triggered eye rolls. Embrace the quirky absurdity. Hold on to the thought that today's chicken soup may very well have originated from a need to mask fear and maintain connections, because after all, we're all just stumbling through our day-to-day bird watching, looking out for the next big laugh, ready to fly into another slice of history. We've navigated a turbulent journey, so let's breathe deeply, share our lessons learned, and marvel at how far we've come. Here's to our ancestors who advanced toward the light through unimaginable darkness and returned to share a few quirky tales along the way. It's been quite a ride, hasn't it? From those perplexing beaked masks to the rituals that made one question if they'd wandered into a surreal art exhibit during a particularly malicious fever dream, we've unearthed the depths of medieval absurdity. Remember the good old days when doctors were just as likely to offer a charm as a cure? Imagine being a villager, stricken with illness, and seeing someone parade into your town draped in a puffy cloak and a beak so long that it could double as a walking cane. You'd think the local bird population suddenly took human form. "Oh, hey Mr. Beakman, what have you brought me today? A potion or a singing parrot?" You'd wonder if he was the answer to your prayers or just an overpriced scarecrow. Yet these quirky practices became a source of comfort amidst the chaos that was the plague's aftermath. In a world steeped in fear, believing in something, anything, could bring a sense of control, or at least a distraction. Those plague doctors might have acted like characters straight out of a farcical comedy, but they were part of a much-needed emergency room staff at the time. The world was teetering on the brink of despair, and these avian-clad figures were literally flying to the rescue. Sure, their approaches to healing were about as effective as a chocolate teapot in a sauna, but they tried. Isn't that the essence of humanity? Even in a panic we stumble forward, experimenting with ideas that may seem less than ideal, like whipping up a bizarre ginger leech soup for that pesky cough. As we reflect on their earnestness, let's not forget their most important lesson. Sometimes it's not about the destination but the journey, and the laughter that rings along the way. They waded through stinky markets and spritzed questionable concoctions into the noses of those unfortunate enough to have breath caught in the midst of a plague-ridden cough. And though they flailed about like beaked puppets, clutching to the fading hopes of their medical knowledge as if it were a tattered flag, they still brought a sliver of kindness and care into a world screaming chaos. Fast forward to today, and we can't help but see how far we've come. No longer do we fear the mere sniffle, scurrying to a mysterious figure hiding in the shadows with a creepy smile and a pouch of questionable ingredients. Thanks to a couple of scientific revolutions, a handful of smart cookies, and a dash of common sense. If only our lineage had recorded that playwright auditioning for the role of historically unfortunate quack, they'd have filled that role quite nicely with unhinged enthusiasm. Reflecting on their situation elicits newfound appreciation for the modern-day medical marvels we take for granted. Can you imagine if your doctor walked in donned with a bird mask instead of a lab coat, claiming to have the cure because they mixed essences of lavender, beetroot, and, well, we really don't want to know what else. Today doctors are getting degrees and licenses, understanding germs and bacteria, and offering actual food for thought. Talk about a plucky twist on progress. And yet, Perhaps it's essential to embrace a touch of their absurdity as we chisel our own paths. The roots of their strange practices remind us that we are curious creatures by nature, willing to explore the uncharted territories of existence, even if those attempts appear ridiculous. It's like remembering a relative who brought a watermelon to a winter feast. What could they have been thinking? We laugh, but we also realise what might seem inconsequential takes courage and creativity in dark times. So raise a glass of metaphorical garlic-infused ale to those resilient ancestors who faced unspeakable struggles but still sought joy where they could find it. So tonight, as you settle into bed, shielded by modern comforts like air conditioning and a reliable Wi-Fi connection, take a moment to thank those bold souls from the past for their trials and tribulations. Their awkward attempts at medicine resulted in a blossoming of knowledge, and maybe just a little foolishness in the face of disease. In the end, even the silly bird doctors had their place, helping us laugh through the terror while simultaneously paving a path toward a more hopeful future.